The Wind in the Willows, Chapter 3, The Wild Wood. The mole had long wanted to make the acquaintance of the badger. He seemed to be such an important person, but whenever the mole mentioned his wish to the water rat, he always found himself put off. "Couldn't we ask him here, dinner or something?" said the mole. "He wouldn't come," said the rat simply. "Badger hates society and invitations and all that sort of thing." "Well then, suppose we go and call on him?" "Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't like that at all," said the rat, quite alarmed. "He's so very shy, he'd be offended. Besides, we can't. He lives in the middle of the wild wood." The mole had to be content with this, and it was not till summer was long over and the cold and frost kept them much indoors that he found his thoughts dwelling again on the solitary grey badger who lived his own life by himself in the middle of the wild wood. In the winter-time, the rat slept a great deal. During his short day, he scribbled poetry or did small domestic jobs about the house, and of course there were always animals dropping in for a chat. Still, the mole had a good deal of spare time on his hands, and so one afternoon, when the rat in his armchair was alternately dozing or trying to fit rhymes together, he formed the resolution to go out and explore the wild wood and perhaps strike up an acquaintance with Mr. Badger. It was a cold, still afternoon with a hard, steely sky overhead when he slipped out of the warm parlour into the open air. The country lay bare and entirely leafless around him. With great cheerfulness of spirit, he pushed on towards the wild wood, which lay before him, low and threatening. There was nothing to alarm him at first. Twigs crackled under his feet, logs tripped him, funguses on stumps startled him for a moment, but that was all the fun. It was exciting. Then the faces began. He thought he saw a little face looking out at him from a hole. He quickened his pace, telling himself cheerfully not to begin imagining things, or there would simply be no end to it. He passed another hole, and then another, and then, yes, no, yes, certainly a little narrow face flashed up and was gone. He hesitated and strode on. Then suddenly there were hundreds of them coming and going rapidly, all hard-eyed and evil and sharp. Then the whistling began. Very faint and shrill it was, and far behind him when first he heard it. Then it broke out on either side. They were up and alert and ready, whoever they were, and he was alone and far from help, and the night was closing in. Then the pattering began. Was it in front or behind? It seemed to be closing in on him, hunting, chasing something or somebody. In panic he began to run too. He ran up against things, he fell over things and into things, he darted under things and dodged round things. At last he took refuge in the deep dark hollow of an old beech tree. He was too tired to run any further and could only snuggle down into the dry leaves and hope he was safe. Meanwhile, the rat, warm and comfortable, dozed by his fireside. Then a coal slipped, the fire crackled, and he woke with a start. He reached down to the floor for his verses, and then looked round for the mole to ask if he knew a rhyme for something or other. But the mole was not there. He called, "Moley," several times, and receiving no answer, got up and went into the hall. The mole's cap and his galoshes were missing. The rat left the house, hoping to find the mole's tracks. There they were, sure enough. He could see the imprints in the mud, leading directly to the wild wood. The rat looked very grave. Then he re-entered the house, strapped a belt round his waist, shoved a pair of pistols into it, took up a stout cudgel, and set off for the wild wood at a smart pace. Here and there, wicked little faces popped out of holes, but vanished immediately at the sight of the valorous animal, his pistols and the great ugly cudgel in his grasp. He made his way through the length of the wood, all the time calling out cheerfully, "Moley, Moley, Moley, where are you? It's me, old rat." At last, to his joy, he heard a feeble voice saying, "Ratty, is that really you?" The rat crept into the hollow and found the mole exhausted and still trembling. "Oh, Rat," he said, "I've been so frightened." "Oh, I quite understand," said the rat soothingly. "You really shouldn't have gone and done it, Mole. I did my best to keep you from it." Surely the brave Mr. Toad wouldn't mind coming here by himself, would he?" inquired the mole. "Oh, Toad," said the rat, laughing. "He wouldn't show his face alone here, not for a whole hatful of golden guineas." The mole was greatly cheered by the rat's laughter and the sight of his stick and his gleaming pistols. "Now then," said the rat, "we really must make a start for home. It will never do to spend the night here." "Dear Ratty," said the poor mole, "I'm dreadfully sorry, but you must let me rest here for a while longer if I'm to get home at all." "Oh, all right," said the good-natured rat. "Rest away." So the mole got well into the dry leaves and stretched himself out and presently dropped off to sleep. When he woke, the rat went to the entrance of their retreat and put his head out. Then the mole heard him saying quietly to himself, "Hello, hello, here is a go." "What's up, Ratty?" asked the mole. "Snow is up," said the rat briefly, "or rather down. It's snowing hard." The mole crouched beside him and, looking out, saw a gleaming carpet springing up everywhere. A fine powder filled the air and caressed the cheek. Well, it can't be helped," said the rat. "We must make a start. The worst of it is, this snow makes everything look so different." It did indeed. The mole would not have known that it was the same wood. However, they set out bravely and took the line that seemed most promising. An hour or two later, they pulled up, dispirited, weary, and hopelessly at sea. The snow was so deep that they could hardly drag their little legs through it. There seemed to be no way out. "Look here," said the rat. "There's a sort of dell down there. We'll make our way down into that and try and find some sort of shelter." They struggled down and hunted about for a corner that was dry. Suddenly the mole tripped and fell forward with a squeal. "Oh, my leg!" he cried. "Oh, my poor shin!" "Poor old mole," said the rat kindly. "Let's have a look." "I must have tripped over a branch," said the mole miserably. "It's a very clean cut," said the rat. "Looks as if it was made by a sharp edge of something in metal. Funny." "Well, never mind what done it," said the mole, forgetting his grammar in his pain. "It hurts just the same." But the rat had left him and was busy scraping in the snow. Suddenly he cried, "Hooray!" and then, "Hooray, hooray, hooray!" and fell about to executing a jig in the snow. "What have you found, Ratty?" asked the mole. "Come and see," said the delighted rat. The mole hobbled up and had a good look. "A door scraper? Well, what of it? Why dance around a door scraper?" "Don't you see what it means, you dull-witted animal?" cried the rat impatiently, and he set to work again and made the snow fly all around him. After some further toil, a very shabby doormat lay exposed to view. "There, what did I tell you?" exclaimed the rat in triumph. "Absolutely nothing," replied the mole. "Can we eat a doormat or sleep under a doormat, you exasperating rodent?" "Do you mean to say," cried the excited rat, "that this doormat doesn't tell you something? Scrape and dig if you want to sleep dry and warm tonight, for it's our last chance." The rat attacked a snowbank beside him, digging with fury, and the mole scraped busily too to oblige the rat. At last the result of their labours stood in full view of the astonished mole. In the side of what had seemed to be a snowbank stood a solid little door. On a small brass plate, neatly engraved, they could read, "Mr. Badger." The mole fell backwards from sheer surprise. "Rat," he cried, "you're a wonder. If only I had your head." "But as you haven't," interrupted the rat, Get up at once and hang on to that bell pull and ring as hard as you can while I hammer." While the rat attacked the door with his stick, the mole sprang up at the bell pull, clutched it and swung there, both his feet well off the ground, and from quite a long way off they could faintly hear a deep-toned bell respond. They waited patiently for what seemed like a very long time. At last they heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps. There was a noise of a bolt being shot back, and the door opened a few inches. "Now the very next time this happens," said a gruff voice, "I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is it?" "Oh, Badger," cried the rat. "It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole, and we've lost our way in the snow." "Why, Ratty, my dear little man," exclaimed the Badger in quite a different voice. "Come along in, both of you. Why, you must be perished." The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside. The Badger looked kindly down on them and patted both their heads. "This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out," he said. "Come along into the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire there, and supper and everything." He shuffled on in front of them, and they followed him down a long, gloomy passage into the glow and warmth of a large firelit kitchen, where plates on the dresser grinned at pots on the shelves, and the merry firelight flickered and played over everything. The kindly Badger thrust them down on a chair to toast themselves at the fire, and bathed the mole's shin and mended the cut with sticking plaster till the whole thing was just as good as new, if not better. When they were thoroughly toasted, the Badger summoned them to the table. When they saw the supper that was spread out for them, really it seemed only a question of what they should eat first. Conversation was impossible for a long time, and when it was slowly resumed, it was that regrettable sort of conversation that results from talking with your mouth full. The Badger did not mind that sort of thing at all, nor did he take any notice of elbows on the table or everybody speaking at once. He nodded gravely as the animals told their story, and he did not seem surprised or shocked at anything, and he never said, "I told you so," or remarked that they ought to have done so and so. The mole began to feel very friendly towards him. When supper was finished, they gathered round the fire, and the Badger said heartily, "Now then, tell us the news. How's old Toad going on?" "Oh, from bad to worse," said the rat gravely. "Another smash-up only last week. This is the 7th. "He's been in hospital 3 times, put in the mole, "and as for the fines he's had to pay, it's awful to think of." "Yes," continued the rat, "Toad's rich, but he's not a millionaire, and he's a hopelessly bad driver. Badger, we're his friends. Oughtn't we to do something?" The Badger went through a bit of hard thinking. "Now, look here," he said at last. "You know I can't do anything now." His two friends assented. No animal is ever expected to do anything strenuous or heroic in the winter. "But," continued the Badger, "once the year has really turned, then we'll take the Toad seriously in hand. We'll make him into a sensible Toad. You're asleep, Rat." "Not me," said the rat, waking up with a jerk. "He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since supper," said the mole, laughing. "Well, it's time you were all in bed," said the Badger. "I'll show you your quarters. And take your time tomorrow. Breakfast at any hour you please." The 2 tired animals came down to breakfast very late next morning and found 2 young hedgehogs sitting on a bench eating porridge. "Where's Mr. Badger?" inquired the mole. "The master's gone into his study, sir," replied the hedgehog. "He said as how he's going to be particularly busy this morning, and on no account was he to be disturbed." This explanation was thoroughly understood by everyone present. The animals well knew that Badger, having eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study and settled in an armchair with his legs up on another and a red cotton handkerchief over his face, and was being busy in the usual animal way this time of year. The front door bell clanged loudly, and in walked the otter. "Thought I should find you here," he said cheerfully. "They were in a state of alarm along the river bank this morning. Rat never at home last night, nor Mole either. But I knew that when people were in any fix, they mostly went to Badger, so I came straight here through the wild wood." "Weren't you at all, nervous?" asked the Mole. The Otter showed a gleaming set of strong white teeth as he laughed. "I'd give 'em nerves if any of 'em tried anything on with me." Just then the Badger entered, yawning and rubbing his eyes, and they all sat down to lunch together. The Mole took the opportunity to tell Badger how homelike it felt to him. "Once well underground," he said, "nothing can get to you." The Badger beamed at him. "That's exactly what I say," he replied. "And then, if your ideas get larger, a dig and a scrape, and there you are. If you feel your house is a bit too big, you stop up a hole or two. No builders, no tradesmen, and above all, no weather. When lunch is over, I'll take you round this little place of mine." So after lunch, Badger lighted a lantern and bade the Mole follow him. The Mole was staggered at the size of it. "How on earth," he said, "did you find time and strength to do all this?" "As a matter of fact, I did none of it, only cleaned out the passages," said the Badger simply. "You see, a very long ago, there was a city of people here." "But what has become of them all?" asked the Mole. "Who can tell?" said the Badger. "People come and people go, but we remain. Badgers are an enduring lot." When they got back to the kitchen again, they found the Rat walking up and down, very restless. He seemed to be afraid that the river would run away if he wasn't there to look after it. "Come along, Mole," he said anxiously. "We must get off. Don't want to spend another night in the wild wood." "It'd be all right," said the Otter. "I'm coming with you, and if there's a head that needs to be punched, you can confidently rely upon me to punch it." "No need to fret, Ratty," added the Badger placidly. "When you have to go, you shall leave by one of my shortcuts." The Rat was, nevertheless, still anxious to be off, so the Badger led the way along the damp and airless tunnel for a distance that seemed to be like miles. At last, daylight began to show through the mouth of the passage. The Badger, bidding them goodbye, pushed them through the opening and retreated. They found themselves standing on the very edge of the wild wood, rocks and brambles and tree roots behind them, and in front, quiet fields, and far ahead, a glint of the familiar old river.